Hi, my name is Ahmad Najjar, and I'll be your presenter for this session calling APIs, consuming services, and exposing data using Power Automate. Thank you for tuning in. First things first, I would like to thank our sponsors, ScriptRunner, DQ Global, Proximo 3, Redspire, Agilicis, and Hitachi Solutions. A little bit about me. So I'm based in Oslo in Norway. I'm a senior consultant at InfoWorker. I'm a business applications MVP, a passion enthusiastic developer. Been working with Microsoft technologies for 15 plus years for now. And I've been working mainly with SharePoint in addition to other technologies. And mainly right now I work with SharePoint PnP and PowerShell. Among others as well, I work with Power Automate and Power Apps and Logic Apps. I'm also a co-organizer for SharePoint Saturday, and as well as for the Collab Days Nordics. You'll be hearing about that soon enough. And I would like you to I would like to invite you as well to follow me on Twitter. My Twitter handle is at Ahmad N82. And I would like to encourage you to use the hashtag Scottish Summit 2021 on all social media. This session is going to be a demo-rich session, but just like any other session, an introduction is due. And we're going to be talking about a little bit about the Microsoft Power Platform and how it actually connects to the whole ecosystem. So to help empower your people and elevate their talents, Microsoft have combined the capabilities of four services into a unique and powerful local development platform. While the Power Platform has capabilities which will impress any developer, it is also designed to be approachable and accessible to those in other positions, not only for developers. And those people are actually in the best position to identify transformative applications, those who work on the front line of a business. And now digital transformation means more efficient use of your data to gain insight, which facilitates more intelligent business processes and decision making. However, organizations cannot achieve this efficiency with only programmers or data scientists or tech professionals because there simply are not enough of them. So one of the fundamental goals of the Power Platform is to empower the limitless potential of the citizen developers who can use its capabilities to unlock insights and develop processes that would otherwise never surface. And the Power Platform is a singular local platform that spans across the Office 365, Dynamics 365, Azure, and even standalone applications. And today we're going to be diving a little bit deeper into the Power Automate, which is one of the services in the Power Platform, which enables automations for all the which enables automations and serves as a crucial component in the Power Platform. So as you can see, those services that are available with the Power Platform are individually valuable, but they are also better together. Though like you could achieve a lot of volume using them individually, but as well they work well together, well integrated together, and even you could get richer applications use them all together as well. So the Power Platform, as we mentioned before, is meant for everybody to be is meant for everybody: citizen developers, IT developers, and pro developers, and it should be approachable by all of them. But today we're going to be focusing on two types of developers that will be using that. Ever since that we're talking about exposing data, and we're talking about services in Azure, for example, in cloud computing needs and all that. So we're going to be focusing a little bit more about the IT developers and pro developers. So the Power Automate provides an abundance of connectors that makes it easy to connect and consume and expose data from the cloud and the on-prem services. So we have with the public connectors, we have a built-in connectivity to over 300 connectors, cloud services, files, databases, web APIs, etc. And then we have a seamless hybrid connectivity to on-prem systems via the on-prem data gateway. And that means that you need to install the gateway in order to be able to consume whether services that you have on-prem or if you have databases on-prem. And you can set up the types of security credentials that you want. Today, we're going to be talking about a little bit about that as well when we are actually consuming services. So first things first, we want to talk about the whole Power Automate idea or platform. The things that you actually use in the day-to-day in Power Automate is built on connectors. So we want to talk about a little bit about connectors and why they're actually important to talk about in this session. We're talking about consuming services. So first, we want to define what is a connector. A connector is actually a wrapper around an API that allows the underlying service to talk to Power Automate and Power Apps, which means that, and the reason that we mentioned Power Apps because it's a unified platform, which means whatever that you built, if you built a connector for Power Automate, so by definition, it's also available for Power Apps. But the reason that we're actually talking about connectors, so they're actually built on top of wrappers that is built around APIs and services. And it would be a shame if a platform that is built actually on connectors and wrappers around APIs that does not provide the capability of exposing data and getting the data around other APIs that probably you have built or public APIs that are available for everybody to use. And from that point, we could just specify how you actually move the data back and forth in your Power Automate. So we'll divide how you actually move the data in your flow, in and out of your flow, and we will talk about how you could consume the data in and out of your flow and how you could expose the data and use APIs in your Power Automate flows. So the first thing that we're going to talk about today is, as mentioned before, is moving data in and out. If you want to move data in, you could use the HTTP request trigger. So in the trigger, you could just send the data, whether you send it as in the query string or you send it in the payload in the header. So it's expected to be received at the other end. So in that way, you could just introduce new data that you could call this HTTP request or that endpoint that is defined by your flow in Power Automate to introduce data that is actually not existing in other systems. Using an HTTP connector, so whether you are trying to call other services or you call other flows, you could use the HTTP connector, and this HTTP connector could call any other endpoints, whether it is another flow within Power Automate or it is another API. Finally, custom connectors. If you want to introduce other data, probably you would like to for the end user to facilitate that for the end user, in order for the end user to use the services that you've actually created. So instead of complicate things for the citizen developers, you probably would be able to create some custom connectors and make things easier for the citizen developers to consume those services, so they don't have to get tangled with how they could call endpoints. So instead of that, you could just build custom connectors. We will talk about why you would need to build custom connectors in details later during this session. Finally, we'll talk about the HTTP response. So the HTTP response is actually if you want to get data out of your flow. But the thing is that worth mentioning here, you could not do an HTTP response without coupling that with an HTTP request. So any endpoints in the web is actually made up of these request and a response, and you cannot do that even as well with a flow. So you could use a flow with a request without a response. But if you want a response, you definitely need to define a request. So you need to couple a response with a request, and we will come to that later. We will show that as well in the demo. Something I would like to add to this slide, actually, it's kind of a correction to this slide. Previously, I've done this session, actually, and I pointed out that the way that you could get the data outside of the bounds of Power Automate is using the HTTP response. But in addition to that, we could have the HTTP connector and the custom connectors is a way to move data outside of the bounds of Power Automate. And how that it's done. So for example, if you have an endpoint or a service that you would like to call, you could call that using the HTTP connector, and then you could send out the data in the body, for example, as JSON. And you could do that as well with custom connectors, because when you build custom connectors, you could build actions that could, at the other end of that service that you have actually wrapped and created a connector around it, it would be able as well to save the data outside of the bounds of the Power Automate. So let's say that you have a line of business system that you already have that is set up, for example, on-prem or in the cloud, and then you created a custom connector around that. Or even if you call that endpoint using an HTTP connector, you could send out the data outside of the bounds of Power Automate. And with this, we come to our first demo, which is the HTTP request trigger. For this demo, we have created a flow in Power Automate that is very simple and straightforward. So the trigger is an HTTP request. And in the request body, it's actually expecting an item to be sent through the body. And this is actually a message that will be passed on, and then it will create an item in a SharePoint list. And then there's a response which will return OK if this is executed successfully. So it's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. And in order to simulate the call to this flow, we will copy that, and then we will use Postman. So the first thing that we will do here is just paste in the URL, and then we will change that to post. And the reason that we do that, because that the method that we're using here for this defined endpoint, if we could call it in flow, is post. And the second thing that we want to do, because it's expecting something in the header, we want to set the content type to be JSON. Otherwise, we will get an error. So the second thing that we want to do here is just pass in the message that we want to be passed on, and then based on that, it will create a message in SharePoint. And for this one here, we will do exactly as the schema suggests. So it will be a message, and then it will be Scottish, yeah, Summit 2021. And then we will press send. And hopefully we get OK. This is working perfectly. And then if we get back in here and do a refresh, we were supposed to get the message as part of the SharePoint list. So think of this flow as an endpoint. So flows as endpoints. And think of that as if you want to integrate a flow with a third-party application that you're using, whether that you're doing Angular or you're using a .NET Core, whatever application that you're doing, you could actually do that. So you could do a call that will execute a flow, and you could just pass in whatever data that you want, and then pass this as to some other systems that you have here, and this will save you a lot of time because you don't have to think about how to do the integration, because you already have the connectors, which are wrappers around all those APIs. It will definitely save time for you. And now we have came to our second demo, which is calling an HTTP connector in Power Automate. We have already created another simple flow within Power Automate that is also called using the HTTP request. And as you can see here, you need to send two strings at this point. It doesn't matter whether it's a string or a number. You could just define whatever you want just to validate what type of parameters or properties that you're sending with the JSON body. But at this point, what we defined here is just two numbers as string, and then we will convert them later in the service that we're going to be calling. And I've created an Azure function, and I'll be calling that in this step. But before we jump into the Power Automate flow, I would like you to go come with me and see how it actually looks like in Azure. So this is an Azure function, very simple, very straightforward. We will be sending in the body two strings. So it's expecting number num1, the first number, and the second number, which is num2. And then it will check if those are actually as part of the content that is sent with the body. Otherwise, it will just wait until it actually get the hold of them. Otherwise, it will return that please you need to pass two numbers in the query string or in the request body. And otherwise, if it's actually got the hold of those parameters, it will just convert them to integer 32 in here, this step, and then it will return the result of the addition. So it's a very simple Azure function, very straightforward. So I'll get back now to our flow, and you will see here that we have the function URL, which is the URL for our function in Azure that you could get a hold of from the Azure function. And then we have the code, which is actually authenticates you to use that Azure function. I will not be opening those. I'll just open this. So in this, so the method that we'll be using to call this endpoint or the Azure function is post, and then we pass in the URI for the Azure function, and then we pass in as part of the query string, we pass in the code which will authenticate us to use this Azure function, and then we pass in the first number and the second number for addition, and then this will return the results. We will just use the compose for the results because they're returned. It is returned as JSON, and then we will create an item in SharePoint to check the addition results for the first number and the second number, and we will show the result as part of the item in SharePoint, and then we will return a response because we've already created a request here. Then we will return a response that all have done successfully. So with that, we can just demonstrate this. We go to Postman, and then we will add a new tab, and then we will paste this, and then we will change that to post because this is post function, and then as usual, just this is expecting JSON, so we'll change that in the header. So this is expecting JSON in the body, so we will do that as row. So it is expecting two numbers. So I have the first number, which is num1. And then we will pass that as string, as you remember. So we will just put that as 30. And then we have another number, which is num2. And then we will send that as, let's say, 100. So the addition result should be 130. And then we will check the result in SharePoint. So with that, I think that we are ready to execute this, and then we will send the request. Hopefully we'll get okay. Yes, this is executed successfully. And then if we go back again to the site, I think that it is somewhere here, addition results. And then in addition results, this is the last one that we've executed. 30 plus 100 is 130. And think of this as if you have a logic that you want to imply or business validation or whatever that you're trying to do within your flow. You could just use services that is outside of the bounds of Microsoft Flow, and then do the validation and verification, and then you will get back a result. You will send back a result for this validation, or whether you're trying to take some data outside of the bounds of Power Automate, and then you want to insert that into other systems. So this is a really good way that you could just integrate data or even validate, for example, data. Now, something else I want to point out here, because I have also the exact same example, but I've done something a little bit with a tweak just to show you the different ways that you could send parameters with an HTTP request. So I've actually created two sort of identical flows, but different approaches on how you actually send the data. So in this one, we actually don't have any, you don't have to send anything within the body of the request. And as you can see here, this is a get method. So what I'm doing is I'm only sending some data. And what I'm doing here is actually I'm expecting to have those parameters as part of the query string of the request instead of sending that in the JSON body. So you could do whether you could send that as part of the JSON body, or you could send that as part of the query string. So in this one, it is actually part of the query string. And the way that you could get a hold of this is just put triggers, outputs, queries, and then you put the name of your parameter that is, or the name of the query string that is actually expected to be visible as part of the link. So this is the first number, and this is the second number, as you can see here. The rest of the function is exactly the same. It's just inserting the data exactly the same way, but instead of sending the data as part of the body, we're just sending that as part of the query string. So we could as well demonstrate how we could do that. So we copy the link, and then we go back again to our friend here, which is Postman. And then in the headers, we don't need to add anything in here, rather in the body. What we needed to do at this point is actually add something in the parameters. So we go to the params in here, and as you can see, there's several parameters that is passed as part of the URL for this, if we could call it an endpoint in Power Automate. So we will add num, we will have num1, and then we'll put that as, let's say, 100, and then we'll be adding num2, and then we will put that as, let's say, 300. So the expected result is to be 400. Then we will send that. And then I'm not sure if we have, yes, we have the OK in here. So if we go back again to SharePoint and then do a refresh, yes, there it is. So 100 plus 300 is 400. We are back again to the slides, and now we're going to be talking about custom connectors extending the data reach. So first things first, we want to talk about why we want to build a connector. So the first thing that we want to talk about the enterprise developers. So for enterprise developers, if they're looking for a connectivity that is not supported by Microsoft. So let's say that there's a public service that is available, and what I'm saying about what I mean by a public service is that a service that provides, for example, data or something that is available within the cloud you want to get data from. and then you need to connect to that in order to embed that within your flow. Or if you need a connectivity to a custom or internal service. So you have a service that is built in-house in your organization, and then you want to build a wrapper around this API and do a connector, so you'll be able to do that as well with custom connectors. The second reason that why would you build a connector is actually for partners and ISVs. So if you want to expand the number of services that you integrate with, building a custom connector makes that easier because it's so easy to embed those connectors within your flow, and then you provide those extensibilities to your customers based on their needs. So, for example, you see all those third-party connectors that you find with Power Automate, and they provide functionalities that actually not provided by Microsoft, and then you have to buy for those. You still have to buy to pay for those services or those connectors at least, but still that you will provide extensibility and you will provide, let's say, functionalities that's those Power Automate flows does not provide. That's definitely will increase your exposure and adoption based on what kind of service that you actually provide. With this, we come to the demo where we're going to be building a custom connector from scratch. So for this demo, creating a custom connector, we are going to build a custom connector around the Yelp Fusion API. So for those who does not know what is Yelp, so Yelp is like the internet yellow pages. So for example, if you're looking for a point of interest, like a restaurant, a conference, complex, or for example, you're looking for shops, groceries, or whatever, then you will pass in a term, and then it will find this point of interest that you're actually looking for within a country or a city or radius for longitude and latitude that you pass in for this service. And as you can see here in the page, the official page of the Yelp service, you'll find that there's like several services that is provided by the Yelp API, but we are going to build an API around the businesses search API that we have here. And before I start with this, remember that those APIs usually does not function as it is free at the end of the day, but at the same time, you need to create a developer account in order for you to get the key for the API and to consume those services. I have done that previously for this demo, so I will be copying and pasting those different parameters that I need to pass in to create this custom connector. But at the same time, remember that you need to create that beforehand. And another thing that is very important and worth mentioning, if you're actually building an API or building a custom connector around an API, you need to read the documentation very carefully, because there's a lot of details you need to take into account while you're building this custom connector, and things that you need to take into account: how to authenticate against the API, and how the different dynamic content that is going to be created. For example, the JSON payload that comes back with the service, how we're going to present that, how we can read that, etc., etc. So with that, we will start building our custom connector. We'll be jumping back and forth between the building the custom connector and the API documentation. So for this one, you will find that the custom connector is now underneath the data section, and then you will have the custom connectors in here, and you'll have this page. So the first thing you'll notice here that you are able to build custom connectors around, there's multiple choices when you start building a new custom connector. So you can build from blank, or you could build from an Azure service, or an open API file, or an open API from a URL or a Postman collection, or even from GitHub. So there's multiple ways that you could create your APIs just to make it easier for you not to start from scratch building your API. You could build the API based on things that you've already have. So for example, some APIs provide an open API file, and it will have all the bits and pieces and definitions that you don't have to define this specifically for each and every property that you need to fill in within the custom connector creation process. So this is kind of like, it just makes things easier for you. So whether you have something in Azure or you have, for example, a Postman collection of an API that you have created previously from one that you built in-house, so you could just use that right away. But for this demo, we will create a custom connector from blank. So we need to give a name for our connector. So we'll call it the Scottish Summit underscore Yelp, for example. Then hit continue. And at this point, you will be presented with some general information that you need to fill in for your custom connector. So you could either upload an icon or an image for your custom connector. I've already done that, so I'll just copy that from my supporting document, and I'll just put in a link in here. And this will actually get us the link for Yelp. And then if you want to have a background, this will take, for example, if you want it black or make it white, for example, we can go with white. And then you add some description as well here. If your API exists on-prem, then you need to pass in the information for your data gateway. So you'll check that, and then you'll pass in different data. And as well, here you specify the scheme for your API, whether it runs on HTTPS or on HTTP, and this one actually runs on HTTPS. So here we come to the first parameter that we need to set as well for our custom connector, which is the host. And then we're going to go back again to our documentation, and here it says that the endpoints, that all the Yelp Fusion APIs endpoints running under this host. So this is what we need to pass in here. This is the only thing that we need to pass in there. We don't need to worry about the version of the API, so we just need the host. This will be taken care of later during the process. I mean for the version. So we go next. And now we are need to set up the security for our custom API, for our custom connector. So what we need to do here is we want to see how this API authenticates. So we go to Authentication and see how it actually works. So as you can see here in this section, there's a lot of details in there. But as you can see in this section, it just says that to authenticate API calls with the API key, set the authorization HTTP header value as bearer API key. The API key is actually what you get when you create your own developer account with Yelp Fusion API. So that's something that I've already done before. But notice there's a lot of information in this just one line in here. So we go back again here. So it just tells us that this works with an API key. So as you can see here, it just says that it calls with an API key, and then you need to set the authorization HTTP header. So there's a parameter that you actually pass in the header in each and every API, which is defines the authorization. The label is not important at this point. You could just call it whatever you want. You could call it, for example, Scottish Summit key, for example, or let's call it API key. So it doesn't actually matter because this is just something that will just tells you what type of key, because there's a lot of APIs that have several keys, just like the one that we see in Azure Functions, that you have master keys and then you have other keys as well. this is just to tells you what kind of key that you're actually passing in. But here is actually the authorization, or what this name of the parameter that will be set in the header. And this is what is important. It says here that we need to set the authorization parameter. So we can copy this from our supporting document and then paste this in here. The last thing that we want to know is whether this parameter is going to be in the header or whether it's going to be part of the query, just like Azure Functions. We go here and then we see that this is actually passed in the header. So we're good to go at this point. We go to the next step. Now we need to define the different actions or triggers for this custom connector. So you could define multiple actions or even multiple triggers based on how the APIs actually operates. So for this one, we are going to create an action, but not a trigger. So we'll just click here and then say, let's go, for example, this is going to be business search. And for the description, we could just use exactly the same as well. And we could just need to put an operation ID for that. But this one needs to be a unique string that identifies the operation. Depends on what you are actually trying to do. So we could just call it search, for example, businesses, for example. And now we need to set the request. So with the request, sometimes you send some, for example, JSON payload with the body. And for that, we need to go back again to the documentation. So this is the endpoint for the search endpoint. And notice that there's several parameters and there's like a request. So we need to define the request and actually what comes with the request. So I'll just import a sample and notice that the verb that we're using is get as per the documentation suggests. And then we are going to copy a URL. I'll just I'll explain that later for you guys. So as you notice here, we actually copied exactly the same URL from this guy over here. And then I've actually added some parameters as well as part of the query string, because this is how it actually works. You pass in those parameters within the query string. I didn't actually use all the parameters stated as part of the parameter set for the API. I only used the term and location and longitude and latitude, but notice that you'll find other things that you could just filter your search based on whether it's open or not, other attributes that are available, whether if there's like categories, for example, that you could just, or radius you want to set, etc., etc. So I'll just import this. And when I'm done importing that, it actually have already recognized that I have passed in query strings within the query of the URL. It noticed that I have term, location, longitude, and latitude. We want to make the term required, because it's definitely required. And we want to set the location to be required as well. So as for the request, we are set for now. We don't need to add anything at this point for our request part. So we go back again to the response. So I'll just add a response, and this is actually based as well on the documentation. As you can see here in the documentation, it just tells you there's a lot of properties that comes back with the JSON payload that comes back from the API, and you could just take that as an example as well to put that in to define your response body. And actually the response body, this will form our dynamic content in Power Automate when we use this connector. So I'll just put in here this in the body and just say import. And then if we open this, you'll notice that in the default, it just recognized all the parameters or that gets back as well, all the attributes that gets back with the JSON payload. At this point, I think that we are ready to create our connector. And now the connector is actually created. We can just go ahead and test that. But first, we need to set up the connection. In here, where we pass in the key for our API when we define the connection. So we'll just create a new connection, and this will open in a new browser. And notice now that the label says Scottish Summit API key. And this is where we need to pass in the bearer with the API, which is the one that you get when you create your developer account. So I'll just copy my key from here and then paste it in here and then create a connection. This, I think, will not take a lot of time, hopefully. Yes, this is created. So for example, that we want to search, for example, for places to eat, to dine, coffee, places to go to. So for example, if you say, for example, burgers in the city of Oslo and then test the operation, this should return a set of businesses that you have around the area in Oslo. So with that we could just update the connector with the new connection that we have already created. Okay, so the connector have been actually created successfully and updated. So now we could just go and create some flows using this connector. So we go and let's say we want to do an instant flow. We want to trigger that manually. We call this search businesses with Yelp, and then we create that. And then we probably want to pass in, for example, the point of interest, which is the term, what we are actually searching for. And then in the next step, we could just search for Scottish Summit Yelp. We should get that soon enough. Yes, this is the one that we are looking for. And notice here, this is businesses search, which is the action that we've defined. We definitely have no triggers, but we do have one action. So with this, I'll just pass in the point of interest that I've defined as part of the flow, and the location, let's say it's going to be Oslo. And just I'll add an extra step to show the data in. So I'll just do a compose. And in this, I will show the ad, for example, the businesses maybe. So we'll see the businesses, and in the next step, we'll see the total number of restaurants around the Oslo area that serves burgers, for example. So I'll do another compose. And then I'll use the total, which is the total number of businesses that serves burgers. We'll save that for now. And we can just go ahead and test the flow. We'll do that manually. Just move that a little bit here, and then test that, and then continue. And then we pass in here, for example, burgers, and then run the flow. That should be done now. Yes. And then here we have a set of businesses. As you can see, it's returned as part of the JSON payload. The number, longitude, and latitude for the place, the name of the place as well, an ID, etc., etc. And this is actually the total number of of places that serves burgers. It's 146 places. With this, we reach to our final demo, which is doing an HTTP response, returning some data. We've already did that with other flows by returning the OK message that the actions have been executed successfully, but we want to show you something probably in depth, how you could just return data using the HTTP response. For this demo, we've already created another simple flow, which will be called using an HTTP request when an HTTP request is received. And you remember that we said that the HTTP request needs to be, or the response need to be paired with a request. And this is just a GET request, and then we get all the items from the HTTP messages from the first demo. I initialize an array in here to just put, because I don't want all the whole data for the item, because there's other properties that gets back as well with the SharePoint, like for example, the created item, created line, all that. I just only need the messages. So I just append those messages into an array, and then I just return this array as a response. So with this, I could just copy this and then go to our friend Postman, and then paste this in here, and then do a send. I should get all the messages now back as part of the response. Thank you for tuning in to my session. The session will be uploaded to YouTube after 14 days from the date of the event. And we'll see you on the next one in 2022. Hopefully it will be in person. Stay healthy and safe until then. Thank you very much.